Welcome back. As you guys know, the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline launched yesterday, which is the 988 number. And today, I got the chance to speak with Dr. Annette David, who gave her take on how important this lifeline is. Take a look.
Good afternoon. Yes, good afternoon. So, Dr. David, as you may have known, the 988 number launched yesterday for our island, and um, for for those of our viewers who don't know what this 988 number is, could you just give a brief explainer?
Of course, it's really a wonderful event for Guam and for the rest of the country because the launch of 988 wasn't just here in our island, but it happened nationally. What 988 is sort of like 911, but for mental health. So it used to be in the past, if you had any sort of emergency, whether it was a crime or some sort of medical emergency or some sort of mental health emergency, you would dial 911. But that really meant that all of these different emergencies were coming into just one place. And so I think what's happened is, especially after the pandemic, when people realized how important mental health is, they've decided to create a separate line for mental health and suicide prevention. So today, if you ever run into any type of mental health emergency, or if you know someone, for instance, who you think might be at risk for suicide, there is a specific number you can call, and it's easy to remember. It's 988.
So Doc, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I know Guam tried to launch their own little mental health crisis hotline um, for a while, but now that there actually is an actual one, and it's super easy. It's basically 911, but instead of 911, it's 988. So it's super easy
Right.
to keep in mind. But um, what does this launch mean for our island? And like, Doc, the basically importance to the mental health of our residents who can dial this number anytime if they're having a crisis.
Absolutely. So let me ask you, Daniel, you mentioned the crisis hotline that we have at the Guam Behavioral Health, right? So what's that number? Do you remember?
Unfortunately, I do not. And
Don't, right?
oh my
Exactly.
goodness.
And that's the point, right? So 988 now takes over. The crisis hotline at Guam Behavioral Health is now merged into 988. And so now it's easy because you can ask anyone. I mean, people know that for years we've had the crisis hotline. It's actually been around for a long time, and it's done a really good job at providing that sort of support for people in our island. But as you and I both know, it's hard to remember that number 647-8833. But if you're in an emergency, can you remember that? No. So you want something easy. You want something that, regardless of what's going on around you, you will remember, and that's what 988 is. So the crisis hotline is now merged into 988. And I do have to say that we should acknowledge the leadership of Director Therese Ariola and her team at the Guam Behavioral Health and Wellness Center because they've been working really hard over the past year and a half to make sure that the 988 launch goes smoothly.
Thank you for your take on that, Dr. David. But the launch of the 988, it's basically anybody of any age. If they're experiencing any type of mental crisis, it can be anxiety to just, having suicidal thoughts, they can immediately dial that and somebody will pick it up. And um, I
There's
guess,
someone you can talk to, and but that someone is trained in mental health first aid, and that someone is trained to help assess if you're at high risk for anything that might be dangerous to your health, like suicide, and so they can get you in contact with the sort of professional help that you might need. And sometimes you just need someone to talk to, and that I think is a very important function of 988 as well.
so Doc, you did mention that these people who answer the hotline, they're trained in mental health first aid. That's the first time that I've actually heard of that term, mental health first aid, and it sounds really interesting. Could you, I guess, just explain really really briefly what that would mean?
Okay, well, I can try. So I have to preface this by saying I'm not a mental health expert at all. I'm trained as an internist, but just like you have physical first aid for people who, for instance, get into accidents, there is also first aid interventions that you can do for someone who's undergoing a mental health crisis, and so part of that is assessing the risk to that person, and the other half of that is getting them to the help that they need. So it is the instant sort of important response to ensure that whoever's on the other end of the line is kept safe.
Perfect, Doc. Thank you for that. And of course, you know, Doc, as a doctor, what do you think? Should everybody memorize this number? You know, even if they're not, mentally
Absolutely.
ill, yes.
No, it's you never know when you need help, right? And I think if anything, one of the lessons we should be learning or should have learned from the past 2.5 years of the pandemic is that sometimes there are external forces completely out of our control, and they can really have an impact on our mental well-being. And so I think it's important to have this sort of support, and you don't even have to memorize it. 988, it's so easy, right? You don't even need to put a lot of effort into it, but just knowing that it's there when you need it at any time, 24/7, that is such a big help to our island. Especially because, as an island, geographically, we are very far from the other types of mental health resources that our friends and family in the US mainland have access to. But with the 988 helpline, we now have access to help that we need whenever we need it here in our island.
Doc, so just to wrap everything up, I I guess what would be the situations where you would call 988, because as we know, there's a bunch of mental issues that like say you're overstressed or you're just really anxious or you're having like a panic attack. Would these situations be the perfect time to call that number?
Absolutely, Daniel. All of the above, everything that you mentioned and more. You can also access the helpline, the 988 helpline, if, for instance, you feel like you're having suicidal thoughts, or you know someone who you think might be at risk for suicide or for depression or any type of mental crisis. And sometimes, loneliness can be enough of a trigger really to take away your balance, and in that case reach out if you feel like you need to reach out. Sometimes you don't always have that person in front of you to reach out to, but with 988 you always have someone you can call.
And when we come back, house to home. Don't go anywhere.